My wife's family called me, quote, zero behind my back. So I showed them the investment account that makes me their landlord. I was standing in the kitchen of my mother-in-law's beach house when I heard it. Not the words themselves at first, just laughter drifting through the French doors from the veranda where they'd all gathered for evening cocktails. Rich, entitled laughter that had a certain edge to it, the kind that comes at someone else's expense. I'd been refilling the ice bucket because Victoria, my wife, had asked me to grab it on my way back from the bathroom. Simple enough. Helpful husband doing a small favor. But when I heard my name mixed with that laughter, I stopped. My hand was still on the freezer door. I heard Victoria's cousin Genevieve say it first. Well, at least the help is useful. More laughter. Then my father-in-law's voice, deep and dismissive. The ice bucket slipped from my hands. It hit the marble floor with a crack that should have alerted them, but the music from the veranda was too loud. I stood there, staring at the scattered ice cubes melting on their expensive Italian tile, and something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted, like a lock clicking open. I'd been married to Victoria Ashworth for 3 years. We met at a charity gala in Manhattan where I was representing my company, a tech consulting firm I'd sold 2 years prior for an amount I never disclosed to anyone. Not even Victoria. When people asked what I did, I said I was in consulting, which was true. I consulted for the new owners of my former company, worked on special projects, set my own hours. It paid well enough that Victoria never questioned it, but not so well that it explained how I could afford our lifestyle. That came from investments. Specifically, real estate investments I'd been making since I was 24, when my first startup got acquired by Google for $18 million. I was 36 now. That $18 million had become something considerably larger. But I'd learned early that money changes how people see you, and not always in ways you'd want. So I kept it quiet. Drove a modest Lexus, wore good clothes but nothing flashy. Let people assume what they wanted. Victoria's family had assumed I was comfortable but not wealthy, upper middle class, professional, appropriate enough for their daughter who'd been the black sheep of the family for dropping out of Yale Law to pursue fashion design. The Ashworths were old money, not the kind that needed to work but did anyway, out of some sense of noblesse oblige. Victoria's father, Jonathan, ran the family investment firm from an office in Greenwich. Her mother, Carolyn, sat on charity boards and hosted fundraisers. Her brother, Preston, was being groomed to take over the firm. They lived in a sprawling estate in Connecticut, had the beach house in Cape Cod, and a quote 3 d'Als in Vail that was actually a 6-bedroom mansion. They were the kind of people who said things like, quote, 4 and, quote, 5, without irony. I'd known they saw me as beneath them from the start. Victoria had warned me. They're going to be awful, she'd said before I met them. But there's a difference between knowing someone looks down on you and hearing them call you the help, hearing them laugh about it, hearing your wife not defend you, because that's what got me. In all that laughter, I never heard Victoria's voice contradicting them, just more laughter, light and carefree and complicit. I picked up the ice bucket, left the melted cubes on the floor, walked back outside with a smile that felt like it had been carved into my face with a knife. "Ice is here," I said, setting it on the bar cart. Jonathan glanced at me, nodded once, and turned back to his conversation with Preston about some merger. Genevieve, Victoria's cousin who worked in PR and never let anyone forget it, gave me a pitying smile. "Quote 9, she said, in that tone you use with service staff." Victoria met my eyes for just a second. Something flickered there. Guilt, maybe, or embarrassment. But she didn't say anything. Just sipped her martini and looked away. I excused myself, said I was going to take a walk on the beach. No one tried to stop me. Why would they? The help didn't belong in their conversations anyway. I walked for 2 hours. By the time I came back, I'd made a decision. Not about divorce or confrontation or anything that dramatic. About information, about showing them exactly who they'd been laughing at. The next morning, I was up early. Not unusual. I often worked East Coast hours even though we lived in San Francisco. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen island with my laptop, and pulled up the file I'd been avoiding looking at for years. My complete financial portfolio. The one even my accountant only saw pieces of. I'd structured everything carefully, a web of LLCs and trusts and investments that kept my name off most public records. It had started as asset protection. My lawyer had recommended it after the Google acquisition. Quote 10, he'd said, "That makes you a target. Layer it." So I had. I'd created entities that owned other entities that owned properties and securities and venture capital stakes. The centerpiece was something I called the Meridian Trust, named after the street where I grew up. It owned everything. The trust was controlled by a company called Harbinger Capital Group, which was a single-member LLC with me as the sole member. Clean, anonymous, extremely effective. Looking at the portfolio summary made my pulse quicken even though I'd seen it 100 times. The total number had commas I still wasn't used to seeing. But it wasn't the total that mattered right now. It was the specific assets. I scrolled through the Property Holdings tab. Meridian Trust owned 43 properties across 8 states. Most were commercial. Office buildings, retail spaces, a few industrial warehouses. But 6 were residential, high-end residential. And I knew 3 of them very, very well. Property number 23, a 4-bedroom penthouse on Beacon Hill in Boston. Purchase price, $3.2 million. Current value, $4.8 million. Tenant, Genevieve Ashworth, subleasing from a property management company called Sterling Residential, which was, of course, owned by Meridian Trust. Genevieve paid $6,800 per month. She had no idea her rent checks ultimately flowed to me. Property number 31, a ski chalet in Vail, Colorado. 6 bedrooms, hot tub, private slope access. Purchase price, $5.7 million. Current value, $8.1 million. Tenant, Preston Ashworth and his wife Blair. Monthly rent, $9,200. Same situation. Sterling Residential was their landlord of record. They'd been living there for 4 years. Property number 38, a beach house in Cape Cod. The beach house, the one we were currently staying in. The one where I'd been called the help less than 12 hours ago. I'd bought it 7 years ago, before I even met Victoria. It was part of a package deal, a distressed sale from a developer who'd over-leveraged. I got 4 properties for the price of 3. The Cape Cod house wasn't even the prize. I'd wanted the 2 commercial buildings in Providence, but the house was beautiful, so I kept it. Had it managed by Sterling. They rented it out seasonally, mostly to families in the summer. High-end rentals. The property pulled in about $180,000 a year after expenses. Carolyn and Jonathan had rented it for a month last summer. Loved it so much they'd asked about a long-term arrangement. Sterling had worked out a deal. They paid $8,500 monthly for unlimited use, with blackout dates during peak season. They'd been paying for 2 years. They thought they were renting from some faceless property management company. They had no idea their son-in-law owned it, that their rent money was making him wealthier, that every time Carolyn complained about the water pressure or Jonathan griped about the landscaping, they were complaining to people who worked for me. I sat there, staring at my screen, coffee getting cold, and started to laugh. Quiet at first, then harder. Because it was absurd. It was absolutely absurd. Victoria found me like that. She came downstairs in one of her silk robes, hair messy from sleep, and stopped when she saw me. "What's funny?" she asked. Her tone was careful. "We hadn't talked about last night, hadn't talked about the fact that she'd let her family mock me." I closed my laptop. I said. Quote 14. She poured herself coffee, her back to me. Quote 15, she started. Quote 16, I said. Quote 17, quote 18, quote 19. The question hung there. She turned around, cup in both hands, and I could see she was genuinely uncomfortable. Victoria wasn't like the rest of them. She'd always been different, kinder, more aware, but she was still an Ashworth, still shaped by that world, she said finally. Quote 21, quote 22, I repeated. Quote 23, quote 24, quote 25. She came closer, set her coffee down, put her hand on my arm. Quote 26. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did, but another part, the part that had spent 3 years being subtly condescended to at every family gathering, being introduced as, quote 27, in a tone that implied I was lucky to have the title, being assigned the grunt work at every event while Preston held court and Jonathan pontificated, that part was done letting it go, I said. Victoria's face shifted. Instant worry. What? I'm not who they think I am. What does that mean? I opened my laptop again, pulled up the portfolio, turned it so she could see. It means I'm worth about $147 million. It means I own 43 properties, including this house, Preston's chalet, and Genevieve's apartment. It means every time your family has looked down on me, they've been looking down at their landlord. The color drained from her face. She stared at the screen. I watched her eyes move over the numbers, the property addresses, the entity names. "This is real?" she whispered. "Every dollar." "But you said you were in consulting. You said—" "I am in consulting. I just didn't mention everything else." Victoria sat down hard on the bar stool next to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself 100 times. I said. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. The Ashworths respected money, but they didn't respect new money. They certainly didn't respect tech money. I'd have been the tacky nouveau riche who got lucky with a startup. Better than being the help, maybe, but not by much. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Tried to see if there was any part of her that understood why I was hurt, why this mattered. I saw worry. I saw confusion. But I didn't see anger on my behalf. Didn't see righteous fury that her family had treated her husband like a servant. "I'm going to have a conversation with your parents," I said. "About the house." "Daniel, don't, please. It'll make everything worse." Worse than being called the help? They didn't mean it like that. They were drunk, being stupid. They meant exactly like that. I stood up. Victoria grabbed my arm. "Wait. Just wait. Can we talk about this? About all of this? You've been hiding your entire financial life from me for 3 years. That's not nothing. That's huge. And now you want to blow up my family over something they said when they were drunk? They've said worse when they were sober. This is just the first time I heard it. So this is about punishing them? About humiliating them? No, I said. It's about respect. About making sure they understand who they're talking to. Victoria let go of my arm. Stepped back. "You sound like them," she said. "Using money as a weapon. Using power to make people feel small. That's exactly what they do." It stung, because there was truth in it. But there was also a difference. "They've been making me feel small since the day I met them," I said. "I'm just showing them the reality they've been too blind to see." I found Jonathan on the veranda, reading the Wall Street Journal with his morning coffee. Carolyn was doing yoga on the lawn with her instructor, a woman who drove up from Hyannis 3 times a week. Preston and Blair were still sleeping. Genevieve had gone for a run. It was just Jonathan and me. Perfect. "Morning," I said, sitting down in the chair across from him. He glanced up, nodded. "Daniel, sleep well?" "Not particularly." He went back to his paper. Classic Jonathan. I wasn't worth his full attention, I said. Now I had his attention. He folded the paper, set it aside. Poitre 64, quote 65. Jonathan frowned. Quote 66, quote 67. I said it slowly, clearly, watched his face process the words, watched confusion turn to disbelief. Quote 68, he said. Quote 69. I pulled out my phone, showed him a screenshot of the property deed. His name was on the lease agreement. My name was on the ownership documents, buried under 3 layers of corporate entities, but traceable with the right access. Which I had, because it was my property. Jonathan stared at the phone. He said, but his voice had changed, less certain. Jonathan stood up. His face was red. He pulled out his phone, made the call right there. I waited, watched him talk to someone at Sterling, watched his posture change as they confirmed what I'd told him. When he hung up, he looked at me like he'd never seen me before. He demanded. I repeated. Quote 80. Jonathan's face went from red to pale. You heard that. I did, last night. From you, from Carolyn, from Genevieve, while Victoria laughed along. That was a private conversation, taken out of context. The context was you mocking your daughter's husband for being helpful, for doing small favors, for not being wealthy enough to meet your standards. Now you're being dramatic. Am I? Let me tell you what's dramatic. Jonathan. What's dramatic is spending 3 years watching your family treat me like I'm lucky to be tolerated. Like I'm some charity case Victoria took pity on. being assigned to help set up for parties while Preston networks, being introduced to your friends as Victoria's husband in that tone. You know the tone, the one that says, I'm not really one of you. Jonathan sat back down. What do you want? Money? To raise the rent? This is blackmail. I don't want anything, I said, except for you to understand something. You've been living in my house. Your son lives in my property. Your niece lives in my property. You've been paying me over $24,000 a month combined without knowing it. And in all that time, you've treated me like I was beneath you, like I was the help. We didn't know, Jonathan said, but there was no apology in his voice, just defense. Would it have mattered if I'd told you from the start that I sold a company to Google, that I'd turned $18 million into something bigger? Would you have respected me then, or would I have just been the tech bro who got lucky? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because we both knew I'd have been the lucky tech bro. New money, no pedigree, no family name, no decades of carefully managed wealth. Just some kid who'd built something and cashed out. I need to discuss this with Carolyn, Jonathan said finally. Of course. Take your time. I'll be here. After all, it's my house. I walked away, left him sitting there, hands shaking just slightly, face still pale. The unflappable Jonathan Ashworth had been flapped. It felt better than I'd expected. Victoria found me 20 minutes later. Quote 94, quote 95, quote 96, quote 97, quote 98. Her voice was rising. We were in the bedroom now. I closed the door. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. Quote 104, quote 105, quote 106, quote 107. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since this whole thing started. Quote 108, she said quietly. Quote 109, quote 110, quote 111. I sat down next to her. Quote 112. Victoria was crying now, not sobbing, just tears sliding down her face. She said. She stood up, wiped her eyes. She left. I stayed in the bedroom, stared at the wall, wondered if I'd just destroyed my marriage to prove a point, wondered if it was worth it. The rest of the day was tense. Carolyn wouldn't speak to me. Jonathan stayed in his study making phone calls. I assumed he was calling his lawyers, his accountant, trying to verify what I'd told him, trying to find a way out. Preston and Blair showed up for lunch, and the energy shifted immediately. Victoria had clearly told them. Preston looked at me like I was a stranger. Is it true? He asked. We were on the patio, just the two of us. Victoria was inside with her mother. Is what true? That you own my house? Your house in Vale? Yes. Preston ran his hand through his hair. Why didn't you say anything? We've been living there for 4 years. Because you never asked who owned it. You rented from Sterling. They're a legitimate property management company. They handle everything professionally. But you knew. You knew we were living in your property and you never said anything. What should I have said, Preston? Hey, thanks for paying me $9,000 a month? Would that have made it better? It would have been honest. Honest, I repeated. You want to talk about honesty? How many times have you introduced me to your friends as Victoria's husband with that condescending smile? How many times have you asked me to handle grunt work at family events while you networked? How many times have you implied I'm lucky to be part of this family? Preston's jaw tightened. Quote 133, quote 134. He couldn't. We both knew it. So what happens now? He asked. Now? Nothing. You keep living in the chalet. Keep paying rent. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. The only difference is now you know who you're paying. This is fucked up, Daniel. You realize that, right? This whole thing is manipulative and weird. You know what's fucked up? Being called the help by your wife's family, being treated like you're not good enough, being looked down on for 3 years by people who are literally my tenants. Preston stood up. I need to talk to Blair. He left. I sat there, feeling the sun on my face, tasting salt air, and wondering why winning felt so hollow. Genevieve arrived that evening. She'd cut her run short, drove back from Provincetown where she'd been having brunch with friends. Came straight to the house, found me in the kitchen making dinner. Victoria was upstairs. The rest of the family was scattered. We need to talk, Genevieve said. She was wearing Lululemon and still had her sunglasses on. Very Genevieve. Okay, I said. I kept chopping vegetables. Is it true you own my apartment? The apartment on Beacon Hill? Yes. You've been my landlord for how long? About 5 years. You moved in about a year before I met Victoria. She took off her sunglasses. Why didn't you tell me? Why would I? You rent from Sterling. They manage the property. Everything's handled professionally. Your rent check's clear. Maintenance gets done. What difference does it make who owns it? It makes a difference because you're family now. Because it's weird. Because you've been collecting rent from me without telling me. I've been providing you with housing. You're paying fair market rate. Actually, below market rate. I could be charging $8,000 for that apartment. You're paying $6,800. Genevieve leaned against the counter. Jonathan says you're angry. About something you heard last night. I'm not angry. I'm just tired of pretending I don't notice how your family treats me. How do we treat you? Like I'm the help, Genevieve. Like I'm lucky to be here. Like I'm some charity case your cousin married. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. We don't think that. You said it, last night, on the veranda. I heard you. Her face flushed. That was a joke. We were drunk. It's always a joke. It's always just drinks, just family banter, just how we are. But it's not funny to me. It's been 3 years of subtle digs and condescension, and I'm done with it. So what? You want us to grovel? Apologize? Thank you for being such a generous landlord? I don't want anything from you, Genevieve. I just want you to understand that the person you've been looking down on owns the apartment you live in. That should tell you something about assumptions. She grabbed her sunglasses. You're an asshole, you know that? This whole thing is an asshole move. Maybe, but at least I'm an honest asshole. That night, Victoria and I barely spoke. We went through the motions, made dinner, ate with her parents in excruciating silence. Jonathan tried to start a conversation about market trends. It died after 3 exchanges. Carolyn didn't even try. She just ate her salmon and drank her wine and looked at me like I'd personally betrayed her. After dinner, Victoria went to bed early. I stayed up, sat on the veranda with a scotch, looking at the ocean, thinking about choices, about consequences. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer, David Brennan. He was one of the few people who knew my complete financial situation. We'd worked together since the Google acquisition. I texted back, I knew he was right. But I'd already started this. Couldn't stop now. The next morning, Jonathan asked for a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the living room. Victoria sat next to me, but there was distance between us, physical and emotional. Jonathan stood by the fireplace like he was giving a board presentation. He began. I said. Jonathan glared at me. I repeated. Carolyn spoke for the first time. Quote 177. I laughed, couldn't help it. Welcomed me? Carolyn, you seated me at the kids' table at Thanksgiving last year. I'm 36 years old. Victoria is 34. We were at the kids' table with Preston's nephew, who's 12. That was a space issue. The table had 2 empty chairs, Jonathan's college friend and his wife, who didn't show up. But you didn't move us, because we're not really part of the family, not the important part. Preston leaned forward. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we've abused you or something. So what if we didn't treat you like the second coming? You married into our family. There's always an adjustment period. 3 years is a hell of an adjustment period, Preston. Maybe if you'd been more open about who you really were, things would have been different. Would they? You think if I'd told you I sold a company to Google, your father would have respected me? Or would he have called me a tech bro and dismissed everything I built? The room went quiet, because we all knew the answer. I think we all need some time to process this, Victoria said. Her voice was steady, diplomatic. Daniel, can you give us some space just for a few hours? It felt like a slap, but I stood up. Sure, I'll go for a drive. I left. Got in my car, drove to Provincetown, walked around for a few hours, tried to remember why I'd thought this was a good idea. My phone rang. David Brennan. He asked. I said. We talked for an hour. I told him everything. The comment I'd overheard. The revelation to Jonathan. The family meeting. David listened. Then he sighed. Daniel, I'm going to say this as your lawyer and your friend. You need to decide what you want here. Do you want to be right? Or do you want to be happy? Can't I be both? Not usually, not with family. Being right means they'll always resent you. Being happy means letting some things go. I tried letting things go, for 3 years. I know. And maybe that was a mistake too. Maybe you should have addressed it earlier, been more open, built a different relationship from the start. So what do I do now? That depends on what you want your marriage to look like. If you want Victoria, you're going to have to find a way to coexist with her family. If you want to be vindicated, to prove your point, you'll probably lose her. I sat down on a bench overlooking the harbor. I don't want to lose her. Then you need to figure out how to de-escalate. How to make this about moving forward instead of rehashing the past. You mean let them off the hook. I mean give everyone a path back to normal, whatever that looks like. I thought about it. About what normal could mean now. What if I don't want the old normal? What if I want them to actually see me, to respect me? Then you need to give them a reason that isn't based on fear or leverage. Money doesn't buy respect, Daniel. You know that. It buys deference. Those aren't the same thing. He was right. I hated that he was right. But he was. Thanks, David. Anytime. Call me if things get legal. I'll send you a bill for the therapy session. I laughed despite everything. Hung up. Sat there watching boats in the harbor. Thinking. When I got back to the house, it was early evening. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange. Victoria was on the beach. Alone. I walked down to meet her. Can we talk? I asked. She nodded. We walked along the shore, water lapping at our feet. They're angry, she said. All of them. My mother thinks you're vindictive. My father thinks you're manipulative. Preston thinks you're unstable. What do you think? She stopped walking, turned to face me. I think you're hurt. I think you've been hurt for a long time and I didn't see it. Or didn't want to see it. Because it was easier to ignore than to fight with them. Victoria. No, let me finish. You were right. About them, about how they treat you, about me not defending you. You were right about all of it, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She was crying again. I pulled her close. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said. I know. You did it to be seen. I understand that now. But Daniel, they're never going to be the family you want them to be. They're never going to be warm and welcoming and treat you like you're one of them. That's not who they are. So what do we do? I don't know. Maybe we find a way to have boundaries, to protect ourselves from them, to see them less, to build our own life that doesn't revolve around their approval. You do that? Pull back from them? I've been trying to pull back my whole life. This might finally be my excuse. We stood there, holding each other, while the sun finished setting. I don't want to be their landlord anymore, I said. What? The properties. Your family's properties. I want to sell them, or transfer them, get them out of the equation. You'd do that? I don't want money to be the reason we have any relationship with them. Good or bad. I want a clean separation. If we're going to see them, it should be because we choose to, not because I'm collecting rent checks. Victoria pulled back, looked at me. You'd take that loss? The Cape House alone is worth millions. It's not a loss if it saves my marriage, if it lets us start fresh. What about proving your point? About showing them they were wrong about you? I don't need to prove anything anymore. They know who I am now. That's enough. We walked back to the house together, found the family in the living room, clearly waiting for us. I sat down, Victoria next to me. I have a proposal, I said. I'm going to transfer ownership of the 3 properties you're currently renting. Preston, the chalet is yours. Genevieve, the apartment is yours. Jonathan, Carolyn, I'll sell you this house for the price I paid 7 years ago. Below market. You can buy it, or I'll transfer it to Victoria as a gift. The room went silent. Why would you do that? Jonathan asked. Because I don't want to be your landlord. I don't want money to be part of our relationship. For better or worse, you're my wife's family. And I love my wife, so I'm removing the complication. This is a trick, Carolyn said. There must be strings attached. No strings. I'll have my lawyer draft the paperwork. You can have your lawyers review it. Everything will be above board. Preston looked suspicious. What do you get out of this? Peace, a chance to start over, an end to this whole mess. Victoria squeezed my hand. Jonathan exchanged a look with Carolyn. Then he nodded. All right. We'll review the paperwork. Over the next 2 weeks, David drew up the transfers. Preston got the chalet, Genevieve got the apartment. Both were shocked. Both tried to refuse at first. But I insisted. Made it clear this wasn't charity. It was closure. Jonathan and Carolyn took longer to decide. They had their lawyers review everything. Look for traps. There weren't any. Eventually, they agreed to purchase the Cape House for $4.2 million. Less than I could have sold it for, but enough to make it a real transaction. Not a gift. The sale closed on a Friday. David called to confirm. It's done, he said. How do you feel? Lighter, I said, and I meant it. Victoria and I flew back to San Francisco the next day, left Cape Cod behind. On the plane, she asked me something I'd been waiting for. We didn't see the Ashworths for 6 months. Didn't attend Thanksgiving, sent gifts for Christmas, but declined the invite to Connecticut. They didn't push. Carolyn called Victoria a few times. The conversations were stilted but polite. Preston sent a thank you card for the chalet. Genevieve sent flowers with a note that said, I'm sorry for all of it. Life moved forward. I went back to consulting work. Victoria's fashion line started taking off. She landed a deal with a boutique chain in New York. We were happy, genuinely happy. And then, 7 months after the Cape Cod disaster, Jonathan called. Not Victoria, me. Quote 247, quote, he said when I answered. Quote 248, quote 249, quote 250. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said, quote 251, quote 252. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something. An acknowledgement. I'll pass, I said. But thank you for the offer. Fair enough. Daniel, I owe you an apology for how we treated you, for what I said that night. It was beneath me and beneath you. Thank you for saying that. Will you consider bringing Victoria to visit? We miss her, and we'd like to see you both. I'll talk to her about it. We did visit. Eventually. It was awkward at first. Careful. Everyone dancing around what had happened. But over time, it got easier. Not perfect. Never perfect. But better. Carolyn still made comments sometimes. Jonathan still had his moments of condescension. But there was a difference. A subtle shift. They saw me now. Not as the help. Not as the tech bro. Just as Daniel. Victoria's husband. Someone who'd proven himself in a way they couldn't ignore. Did they respect me? I'm still not sure. Maybe. In their way. But I didn't need their respect anymore. I had Victoria. I had my self-respect. And I had the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself, that I'd drawn a line. 3 years after the Cape Cod incident, Victoria and I had our first child, a daughter. We named her Eleanor. When Carolyn held her for the first time, she cried. Quote, 259, she said. And then, looking at me, quote, 260. It was the kindest thing she'd ever said to me, maybe the only kind thing. But it mattered. Jonathan bought Eleanor a trust fund, put $100,000 in it. A grand gesture, his way of saying sorry, I think, or maybe his way of acknowledging that I was family now, really family. Preston and Blair had a kid 2 years later. Preston called to ask for parenting advice. We talked for 2 hours. It was the first real conversation we'd ever had. Genevieve got engaged to a guy who worked in tech. She invited us to the wedding, introduced me to her fiancé as, quote, 261, quote. The word brilliant hung in the air. A correction of history. Victoria and I built a life. Not the one I'd imagined when I was 24 and selling my first company. Not the one she'd imagined when she was at Yale Law. But a good one. An honest one. And sometimes, late at night, Victoria asks me if I'd do it differently. If I'd keep quiet. Let them keep calling me the help. Stay invisible. And I always give her the same answer. Quote, 262, quote. She kisses me then. Tells me she's proud of me. Tells me she should have stood up sooner. Should have been braver. I tell her it's okay. That we got there in the end. And we did. It took a revelation. It took conflict. It took me showing them the investment account that made me their landlord. But we got there. The Ashworths still summer in Cape Cod, in the house they bought from me. Preston still takes his family to the chalet. Genevieve still lives in Boston. And sometimes I drive past those properties and smile, because they're not mine anymore. But they were. And for a brief, perfect moment, they all knew it. They all knew exactly who they'd been looking down on. The help, they called me. The help who owned the roof over their heads. The help who made his money while they spent theirs. The help who was never really the help at all. Just someone they'd been too blind to see. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.